A frantic 12-year-old boy with duct tape wrapped around his thin wrists and ankles sprints through a tranquil Utah neighborhood. Starving, wounded and barefoot, he bangs on one door after another until finally a neighbor answers. The man's eyes widen in horror at the sight. The child is gaunt and emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. He's hungry and he's thirsty, the neighbor tells 911, voice cracking with emotion. The stranger actually begins to cry when he realizes the boy has been bound and held captive in his own family's care. In a trembling voice, the child pleads, "If you could take me to the nearest police station." Well, actually just one favor is fine. Moments later, officers rush into a house down the street and find a second child, a 10-year-old girl, malnourished, terrified, her head shaven, huddled silently in a dark closet. These two children are the youngest of 6 in the once famous Franke family, and their mother is Ruby Franke, a popular YouTuber turned accused monster. How did a smiling momfluencer who shared wholesome family vlogs lead to this nightmarish scene? To understand how this happened, we need to go back to the beginning. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today's story is about the shocking downfall of Ruby Franke, the YouTube mum who turned into a monster. In 2015, Ruby Franke appeared to have it all. A handsome husband, 6 adorable kids, and a thriving new YouTube channel called 8 Passengers. The channel's name referred to their family of 8, the 6 children plus Ruby and her husband Kevin, a seemingly happy, clean-cut Mormon household in Springville, Utah. Ruby was the star and narrator of their daily life, projecting a glamorous yet old-fashioned image of devoted motherhood. Over the next 5 years, millions of viewers tuned in to watch the Frankes' lives unfold. By 2020, 8 Passengers had amassed around 2.3 million subscribers. Ruby presented herself as a no-nonsense, tough-love parent who believed strict rules would produce well-behaved, high-achieving kids. In video after video, she offered parenting advice alongside homeschool routines, family pranks, and smiling holiday photos. To many fans, Ruby was a role model, the poised supermom who could do it all. The family received free vacations, sponsorships, and constant praise from followers who saw them as the perfect, wholesome family. But even as Ruby's online fame grew, red flags were emerging on camera. In vlog clips that shocked viewers, Ruby casually revealed that her punishments went far beyond typical timeout. In one 2020 video, her teenage son Chad mentions he had been banished from his bedroom for 7 months, forced to sleep on a beanbag on the floor as punishment for pranking a sibling. Ruby sits beside him laughing, as if this is a reasonable consequence. In another clip, Ruby recounts how her 6-year-old daughter Eve forgot to pack a lunch for school, and Ruby's response was to refuse to bring her child any food for the entire day. Hopefully nobody gives her lunch and nobody steps in, because then she's not going to learn from the natural outcome, Ruby says matter-of-factly to the camera. Viewers watched in disbelief as Ruby effectively celebrated letting a kindergartner go hungry to teach a lesson. She even at one point threatened to cut the head off her youngest daughter's favorite stuffed toy as punishment for misbehavior. These incidents were disturbing. Was this tough love or abuse? By mid-2020, concerned fans decided it was abuse. A public outcry erupted. Hundreds of thousands of subscribers who once adored the Frankes suddenly recoiled and unsubscribed en masse. Some longtime viewers organized an online petition urging Child Protective Services to investigate the family. In fact, Utah authorities did visit the Franke home in mid-2020 due to these reports, but at the time no action was taken and the case was closed as unsubstantiated. Ruby, however, was furious at what she saw as meddling haters. Instead of moderating her approach, she doubled down. In interviews, she blasted her critics and insisted she was simply showing what a responsible mother looks like by imposing strict discipline. She dismissed the outrage over the beanbag incident, claiming her son's punishment was justified. To Ruby, outsiders simply didn't understand that her parenting was right and everyone else was too soft. But privately, the Franke family's idyllic image was deteriorating. Ruby's eldest child, Shari, sensed her mother's temper worsening and distanced herself. Shari later revealed that off-camera, Ruby had always been quick to slap, yank hair, or smack her children for minor infractions. Now, with YouTube fame fueling her ego, Ruby's rigidity only intensified. Reeling from the backlash and newfound scrutiny, Ruby made a dramatic shift in 2021-2022. She stopped posting to 8 passengers and instead forged a new alliance that would accelerate her downward spiral. Ruby partnered with a local life coach and therapist, Jody Hildebrandt, to create an online parenting course called Connections. Jody Hildebrandt was known in Utah's LDS community for her extreme counseling programs, which promised to fix wayward teens and struggling families through absolute honesty and obedience. In reality, former clients described Jody's program as cult-like and shaming. Ruby became Jody's avid disciple. She started appearing in Connections videos and even earned the title of a certified mental fitness trainer on Jody's website. Desperate to regain a sense of authority and purpose after her YouTube fall from grace, Ruby seemed to drink in Jody's radical teachings. She later admitted that she began to adopt a distorted version of reality under Jody's mentorship. This new worldview saw evil and sin everywhere. I was led to believe that this world was an evil place filled with cops who control, hospitals that injure, government agencies that brainwash, and children who need abuse, Ruby recounted of Jody's influence. In other words, Ruby became convinced that extreme punishment was a divine mandate to purge her children's darkness. Under Jody's sway, Ruby's parenting went from harsh to downright authoritarian. She cut off contact with many loved ones, including her own sisters, effectively isolating her family into Jody's orbit. In 2022, Ruby separated from her husband Kevin and even invited Jody to move into the Franke home, giving Jody immense control. Kevin later said he had been living apart for over a year before Ruby's arrest, and he denied any knowledge of the ongoing abuse. Together, Ruby and Jody imposed bizarre new rules on the children. For example, one Christmas they announced that the 2 youngest kids would receive no presents at all, while their older siblings would, as a lesson against selfishness. The 2 little ones then had to watch everyone else open gifts and were made to clean up all the discarded wrapping paper. In another instance, Jody decreed that Ruby's youngest children must ask permission just to speak to their elders and be harshly reprimanded if they interrupted. Ruby embraced these cruel edicts without question, enforcing them while her husband Kevin reportedly stood by in silence. Inside the Franke household, Jody and Ruby's word was gospel. Tenderness or empathy was seen as weakness. Ruby's older kids, like Shari and Chad, were essentially pushed out of the home. Chad was sent to a wilderness therapy camp in the desert at a staggering cost of $14,000 for troubling his mother, and Shari left for college as soon as she could, going no contact with Ruby by 2022. But for the 4 younger children left under Ruby and Jody's control, there was no escape. Even as her family life descended into madness behind closed doors, Ruby still tried to maintain an illusion of normalcy online. She and Jody launched a joint Instagram and podcast called Moms of Truth, where they dispensed severe, controversial opinions on parenting and morality. In these posts, Ruby, parroting Jody, downplayed the seriousness of eating disorders, blamed rape victims for their assaults, and railed against perceived immorality in society. The content was so extreme that it attracted immediate backlash and mockery across social media. But Ruby no longer cared about public approval. She was preaching what she believed to be hard truth. If anything, the negative reactions only seemed to reinforce Ruby's persecuted mindset. She grew more fanatical, convinced she was on a righteous path that most of the world was too corrupt to understand. When her older sister Bonnie tried to check on the kids, Ruby cut her siblings off entirely, refusing contact for years. Neighbors later reported noticing unsettling signs, the children looking withdrawn or unusual strictness, but Ruby kept the true extent of the abuse well hidden. And all the while, in occasional YouTube updates, Ruby would still flash that bright smile and speak as if everything was fine. As her daughter Sherry later put it, the nice version of her was manufactured for YouTube. The fake Ruby Franke was the best version of Ruby Franke. On camera, Ruby played the devoted, cheerful mum. Off camera, she was becoming a tyrant. On August 30th, 2023, the abuse that Ruby and Jody had so carefully concealed came violently to light, thanks to the courage of a child. That morning, Ruby's 12-year-old son, whom we met at the start of this story, had finally made a run for his life. We now know that this brave boy had actually tried to escape once before, in July 2023, but was caught and tied up with handcuffs as punishment. On this August day, while under the care of Jody at her house in the small desert city of Ivins, Utah, the boy seized a chance to climb out a window and flee. He went door to door seeking help despite his feeble condition, a true act of desperation and heroism for a child. When neighbor Danny Clarkson opened his door, he was met with the sight of a pale, hollow-cheeked boy in dirty, torn pajamas and socks, with bloody duct tape and plastic wraps sloppily bound around his ankles. The boy was so polite, even in crisis, that he apologized for bothering the stranger and gently asked for help. Danny and his wife immediately sat him down, gave him water and a banana, and called 911 while fighting back tears. The boy was in such bad shape that first responders rushed him to the hospital, where doctors noted deep lacerations on his wrists and infected open wounds from prolonged binding. He was also severely malnourished, essentially starved, and dangerously underweight. Yet incredibly, the boy insisted to the neighbors and to paramedics that, "I got these wounds because of me," blaming himself for his injuries. It's now clear this child had been so brainwashed by his mother and Jody that he believed he deserved this torture. Before even treating his own wounds, the boy begged police, "My little sister is still in there," alerting them to 10-year-old Eve trapped back at Jody's house. Officers immediately stormed the residence. Inside, they found a scene that one detective likened to a concentration camp of abuse. Little Eve was discovered sitting cross-legged in a pitch-black closet, alone, in a state of shock. She was so traumatized that for hours after rescue she couldn't speak or even move from the floor. Both children were taken to the hospital for urgent treatment. Meanwhile, police arrested Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt at the scene, charging each with multiple felony counts of aggravated child abuse. Back in Springville, Utah, Police and CPS also swooped into Ruby's home and removed her other two minor children, ages 14 and 16, who were found there, placing all four of the younger Franke kids into state custody for their safety. News of Ruby's arrest spread like wildfire, and many who knew the family said it felt grimly inevitable. Today has been a big day. Ruby's 20-year-old daughter Shari posted pointedly on Instagram that evening. "Me and my family are so glad justice is being served. Finally." Shari revealed that she and others had tried to alert police and CPS for years about her mother, and she thanked the authorities for finally stepping up. In the weeks and months after that dramatic rescue, the full horror of Ruby's actions came to light. Authorities and journalists began digging into evidence, and what they found was worse than anyone imagined. According to police affidavits and later court testimony, Ruby and Jody had systematically tortured Ruby's two youngest children for at least 8 months leading up to the arrest. The children were subjected to confinement, starvation, and physical violence on a regular basis. Ruby's 12-year-old son was forced to perform exhausting physical labor outside for hours or days at a time, often barefoot on scalding concrete under the desert sun, and would incur painful sunburn blisters for which he received no medical care. Both he and his 10-year-old sister were frequently denied food and water for long periods, as Ruby believed hunger was a tool to break their bad behavior. If the boy tried to sneak a drink of water without permission, Ruby would punish him harshly. The children were tied up with ropes, handcuffed, and even at times locked in a small concrete storage room in Jody's basement as a form of solitary confinement. When the 12-year-old's restraints caused deep cuts, Ruby and Jody bizarrely smeared a mixture of cayenne pepper and honey into his open wounds and then rebound them with duct tape, a makeshift torture that left him with permanent scars. Perhaps most chilling of all were Ruby's attempts at pseudo-religious exorcism of her son. In a newly revealed journal entry from July 2023, Ruby wrote that she held her boy's head underwater in the bathtub, covering his mouth and nose, while telling him that the devil would lie and say she was hurting him, but that she is actually trying to save him. Ruby had become utterly convinced her own child was possessed by evil. "I will not feed a demon," she scrawled in another entry, justifying why she starved him. These words are almost incomprehensible. A mother referring to her little boy as a demon who must not be fed. Yet this was Ruby Franke's mindset in the depths of her fanaticism. Facing overwhelming evidence, Ruby Franke ultimately struck a plea deal rather than face trial. In December 2023, she pleaded guilty to 4 counts of felony aggravated child abuse. 2 other counts were dropped. Her partner in crime, Jody Hildebrandt, also pleaded guilty to 4 counts. At their sentencing in early 2024, the judge did not mince words. Ruby was handed 4 consecutive prison terms of 1 to 15 years each, meaning she could serve up to 30 years behind bars. Jody received an identical sentence. Utah law will allow a parole board to determine the exact length, but Ruby will be locked up for many years to come. In the courtroom, the once confident vlogger appeared broken and full of regret, at least on the surface. Through tears, Ruby addressed her children. "With my deepest regret and sorrow for my family and my children. Guilty," she sobbed as she entered her plea. At sentencing, she cried, "For the past 4 years, I've followed counsel that led me into a dark delusion. I believed dark was light and right was wrong. I took from you all that was soft and safe and good," Ruby lamented in a desperate apology. She said she would never stop crying for hurting her kids' tender souls. Observers noted that Ruby seemed to place much of the blame on Jodi's influence, essentially painting herself as another one of Jodi's victims who had been corrupted. In fact, Ruby's lawyers argued that Jodi systematically isolated Ruby and manipulated her into abusing her own children. Ruby claimed she initially trusted Jodi's guidance for self-improvement, but that Jodi twisted it into something heinous. It is true that Jodi's role was central. Even the county prosecutor publicly stated that religious extremism shared by the two women fueled their crimes, as they believed abusing the kids was necessary to cast out evil spirits. But can Ruby simply scapegoat Jodi and move on? Her eldest daughter, Shari, for one, isn't buying it. Shari has openly said she does not believe her mother has fully accepted responsibility. By emphasizing Jodi's cult influence, Shari feels Ruby was trying to make herself look like just another victim, rather than the primary perpetrator her children needed her to be. It's a harsh insight. Even in apologizing, Ruby's instinct was to somewhat deflect her guilt. As of 2025, Ruby sits in prison, awaiting a first parole hearing scheduled for 2026 at the earliest. She is reportedly not in contact with her children or her now ex-husband Kevin, who has filed for divorce and even sued Jodi Hildebrandt for the ruin of their family. The Franke children are safe and living with other family members, trying to heal and rebuild their lives out of the spotlight. Ruby Franke's online channels have been deleted and banned by YouTube in the wake of the scandal. The woman once admired by millions is now universally condemned. But the story doesn't end there, because it forces us to ask, how did this happen? The saga of Ruby Franke is not just a crime story. It's a psychological drama about parental control, the illusion of social media perfection, and the terrifying lengths one mother went to in the name of raising righteous children. It's easy to label Ruby simply a monster, but understanding the emotional and psychological currents in this case provides a deeper and more unsettling insight. Ruby wasn't a random evil. She was a devoted mother who convinced herself that cruelty was love. That paradox sits at the heart of this tragedy. How did Ruby justify the unimaginable abuse she inflicted? The answer lies in a warped belief system that combined her rigid personality, her extremist interpretation of faith, and the echo chamber of social media that fed her worst impulses. From the very beginning, Ruby's identity was tied to being the perfect mother. She subscribed to a traditional authoritarian style of parenting common in certain conservative circles. Spare the rod, spoil the child, taken to an extreme. On YouTube, this manifested as her tough love persona. She truly thought she was instilling discipline and moral fiber in her kids. When viewers praised her for showing the tough side of parenting, Ruby's ego swelled. She ignored critics as mere haters and surrounded herself with fans, and later with Jodi, who reinforced the idea that she was on a heroic mission to raise upright children. This echo chamber was dangerous. According to her daughter Shari, Ruby grew messianic, believing her own hype and seeing herself as a uniquely righteous parent in a world of permissiveness. It's no coincidence that Ruby fixated on religious notions of purity, sin, and obedience. She was a devout Mormon, but under Jodi's influence, her faith morphed into fanaticism. In Ruby's mind, ordinary misbehavior became evil that had to be cast out at all costs. She saw herself not as an abuser, but as a savior of her children's souls. This delusion was so strong that even as she tied up and starved her kids, she told them it was out of love and they needed to repent for their sins. She systematically broke them down psychologically, making them believe they were the problem, hence the boy saying, "It was my fault," for his wounds, which in turn proved to her that the discipline was working. It's a horrifying cycle of abuse justified by delusion. Ruby wrote in her diary that her son was 100% possessed by the devil, and that any pleas for mercy from him were just the devil's lies. By dehumanizing her child as a demon, Ruby deadened her own maternal empathy. In her twisted reality, feeding her starving son would literally be feeding the devil, so she refused to feed him. This is the stark difference between discipline and abuse. Discipline is supposed to teach and guide a child, but Ruby's methods were about domination, fear, and an almost ritualistic need to cleanse what she saw as impurity. She lost sight of her children's humanity, viewing them as objects to control or enemies to subdue. Parental control became parental tyranny. Another crucial layer is the illusion of social media that hid this nightmare for so long. Ruby's public persona was a carefully curated mirage, one that even her own children understood how to manipulate. Shari recounts that as a teen she learned to ask her mother for favors only when the camera was on, because Ruby would want to look like a generous, loving mum on video. Off camera, Shari often walked on eggshells, never knowing when a minor slip would trigger Ruby's rage and earn her a slap or worse. But on camera, the Franke family smiled, went on lavish trips, and talked about values and education. YouTube saw the nice Ruby, as Shari says, the version of her mother that only existed for public consumption. This facade not only fooled viewers, it also fooled neighbors, church members, even authorities who might have intervened sooner. It's a sobering reminder of the power of editing and image. Family vlogs, by their nature, show you a controlled slice of reality. Ruby controlled that slice masterfully. The irony is that ultimately, it was Ruby's own vlogs that gave away the first clues, like Chad on the beanbag, that something was wrong. But those early warning signs were rationalized away by Ruby's fans. She's just strict, or missed by officials, allowing the abuse to continue. Social media stardom also emboldened Ruby. As the channel grew, she began to treat her family life like a business, even paying her kids to perform in videos and taking a cut of their earnings. The family's income and identity became so tied to the channel that Ruby felt pressure to maintain the veneer at all costs. When that public support crashed in 2020, Ruby didn't rethink her parenting. She escalated it in private, perhaps to prove to herself she was still in control. And of course, the platform of YouTube also brought Jodie into Ruby's life. Ruby likely wouldn't have met or needed Jodie's extreme coaching if she hadn't been grappling with the fallout of her online controversies. In a tragic way, the entire 8 passengers experiment set the stage for this downfall, exposing the kids to exploitation, amplifying Ruby's narcissism, and attracting an enabler like Jodie. As Shari wisely observed after escaping her family, there's no ethical way to do family vlogging. When children's lives become content, their rights and safety are at risk. The Franke case is the darkest possible proof of that. Finally, we must talk about the trauma, not only the physical pain, but the profound emotional scars left on the Franke children. It will likely take years of therapy for these kids to truly heal. They were taught that love equates to pain, that their own instincts are not to be trusted, and that they are somehow bad or unworthy. Lessons that cut deeper than any rope. The older siblings have expressed intense guilt and anger. Guilt that they couldn't stop the abuse sooner, and anger at the adults who failed them. Shari, now in her early 20s, has become an outspoken advocate against child exploitation on social media. She's channeled her pain into breaking the cycle, warning other families of the red flags she recognizes all too well. In interviews, Shari has described being diagnosed with PTSD from her upbringing, recounting how even after escaping her mother, she was haunted by paranoia and fear, constantly looking over her shoulder for threats that weren't there. Imagine having to unlearn the idea that your mother, the person who gave you life, was your tormentor. That is the level of psychological damage Ruby inflicted. And what about Ruby herself? Is she a cold-hearted villain, or a woman who became a true believer in a terrible ideology? Perhaps both. The truth is, Ruby Franke allowed her obsession with obedience and perfection to consume her empathy. She was a fully grown adult with agency. At any point she could have chosen to stop listening to Jodi Hildebrandt's poisonous counsel, but she did not. Some might argue Ruby herself was brainwashed, but as Shari bluntly put it, that doesn't absolve her. Ruby still made the choice to hurt her kids and must face the consequences. In the end, Ruby's story is a cautionary tale of how the relentless pursuit of parental perfection can mask profound pathology. She convinced herself she was doing God's work, when in fact she was committing atrocities against the very people she was meant to protect. Ruby Franke's downfall forces us to confront some uncomfortable questions. How many times did we see those sweet family vlogs and miss the warning signs? Why did so many fans cheer on tough love without recognizing it had crossed into cruelty? And what does it say about our culture that Ruby felt compelled to maintain a fake image of a perfect family, even as her real family was suffering? In the end, Ruby Franke will have years in prison to reflect on the devastation she caused. The bright, camera-ready mom is now a convicted felon in a jumpsuit, weeping that she believed dark was light. The illusion is shattered, but we should not just write Ruby off as an inexplicable monster. Rather, we should see her as a warning of how everyday people can twist morality to justify evil. It happened behind the closed doors of an affluent church-going family in Utah, proving that abuse can hide in plain sight, behind smiles and scripture quotes, YouTube thumbnails, and Instagram posts. The Franke children's courage and resilience are the light in this dark story. Their escape, and Shari's willingness to speak out, means no other child will be hurt by Ruby again. As we process the emotional weight of this case, one hopes it sparks a broader conversation about accountability. From parenting philosophies that veer into abuse, to the lack of child labor protections in family blogging, to the responsibility of viewers not to enable exploitative content. Ruby Franke thought she could curate reality to fit her narrative. Reality caught up with her. Was Ruby Franke a monster, or a product of something even more disturbing? That's the question we're left with. Perhaps she was both. In any case, her story stands as a stark lesson in how the road to hell can be paved with good intentions, warped by ego and extremism. It challenges all of us to look beyond the polished surfaces of social media and recognize that real love for children is shown in compassion, safety, and respect, never in fear and pain. Thank you all for watching. If this story shocked you, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. We have many more real stories to uncover.